Welcome back, everyone, for the very final session of this 4-day conference, our closing session, which will draw on all the things we've heard throughout the last 4 days and to look ahead to this nutrition year of action. And I'm just delighted to introduce the facilitator for this closing session, friend and colleague of concern, Antonia Prentice. Antonia is the director of Alliance 2015, Concern's strategic network, which gathers together 8 European NGOs who work together across the globe at both programme and policy level, at both national and international level. And she's also the co-chair of Generation Nutrition, which is a network of NGOs who work together at EU level in order to strengthen Europe's focus on the fight against malnutrition. And she has an absolutely superb panel lined up for you now. So Antonia, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ella, for that warm and kind introduction. And thank you to all the attendees who have hung on in for this final closing panel of what has been an extremely rich and important conference on CMAM this week. This closing panel is an incredibly important moment because it is 2021, the year of nutrition action. It's a massive, important window and opportunity to close the gap on that progress, the speed of which has been eluding us to reach the global nutrition goals that we need to reach by 2030. So in this session this afternoon, we've got an opportunity to reflect on how all of the practical programming, technical learning and experience that we've reviewed with such intensity during the week can best be ramped up and put to use in a massively increased effort to meet those global goals. It took us 20 years to get here with CMAM, but it's got to take us less than 10 years to get where we need to go. Before I introduce our incredibly illustrious panel and give them the questions that they're going to be discussing together today, I just want to remind you some of the key takeaways that have come out of this week. First and foremost, we mustn't forget that wasting is in essence an acute manifestation of the systemic issues of poverty and inequality, and they are exacerbated massively by conflict, climate change, and brought into stark relief by the impact of COVID-19. We know, I don't need to remind you, but we have to say it again, that wasted children are amongst the most left behind of all. Perhaps on a more positive note, one of the things the conference has shown is just what success looks like when countries harness the power of communities themselves in the context of health systems and efforts to improve nutrition overall. But most of all, what we heard was that we need greater coverage, we need to get beyond the blockages, we need to improve the linkages in what we do. To reach the 80% of children who are currently untreated, we need serious political commitment backed by sustainable finance. And this year, we've got plentiful opportunities to get those things in place. We've got the G7, we've got the G20 summit, and we've got the UN Food Systems Summit and Nutrition for Growth. Those are major moments where these things can be assured. And I couldn't have a more knowledgeable, expert and well-placed panel to help us to figure out how these opportunities can best be met. I'm going to introduce the panelists now. Just a reminder to you as attendees that you can, throughout the panel, be popping your questions in the Q&A, and we very much hope to have an opportunity for those of the panelists that can remain with us all the time to answer some of those questions. So feel free to put them into the Q&A as we go through. So without any further ado, and with the reminder that this is all about looking at how we can get the political and financial muscle behind all of that practical experience and know-how we've heard about this week, I'm going to turn to our first panelist. So it's a warm welcome to you, please, Francesco Branca. Everybody, Francesco is from the World Health Organization in Geneva, and he's the director of the Department for Nutrition for Health and Development. The question that we have for you, Francesco, is we've heard so much this week about the urgency and appetite to do more, to reach more children and assist more families. So far, so good. But we heard a lot about blockages as well. So as one of the key policymakers, what can WHO do to bring all of those multiple stakeholders together in this policy space to incentivize and increase coverage? Francesco, looking forward to hearing what you think about that, please.
Antonia, thank you very much. the wasting targets that we've established for 2025 is not at reach. It's 5%, we're about 7%, and even worse for 2030. And only a comprehensive multi-sectoral and systemic approach at country level with focus on prevention and management is going to help us. Food security, WASH, food safety, access to healthcare, that's what we need to do. And I think Victor is going to talk about the global action plan that as a nutrition community we've put together. But clearly, the fact that only 20, maximum 25% of children have access to treatment remains a major challenge. And we're very far from getting the universal coverage of the management of malnutrition. There's been a very nice report just published by the Emergency Nutrition Network, which is highlighting some of the challenges there. Community outreach, surge capacity of the health systems, training of community health workers, and then the big challenge of the supply of the life-saving treatment of ready-to-use therapeutic foods. So we need to take action there. And on the one hand, really bringing mainstreaming the treatment of undernutrition in primary health care. That's a major task that we have taken on board jointly with our partner. And then trying to find ways to improve the supply of ready-to-use therapeutic foods with shorter chain, local production.
I think we might have a small technical problem with Francesco's mic. Francesco, are you hearing us? Right, so I think we might have lost Francesco, which is quite unfortunate. While they try to bring him back in, I think we might move on, and I'll come back to him later. So I'm now going to welcome very warmly Dr. Victor Aguayo, who's the Associate Director of the Program Division and Global Chief of UNICEF's Nutrition Program. So Francesco already helpfully teed up, I guess, our question on the Global Action Plan, and that has come up a lot during the conference this week. What we'd love to know from you, Victor, is from a UNICEF perspective, what are the most urgent issues that you feel need to be taken forward from the conference debates and discussions, and that will have a play in these global moments that mean that the political and financial commitments that we're looking for will be put in place? Please, the floor is yours, Victor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia, and thank you, colleagues. Let me first check that you can hear me well. Can you hear me well, Antonia?
I can hear you clear as a bell.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the question about these most urgent issues. Also, thank you for the summary that you shared with us just a few minutes back. If I were to say which is the #1 urgent issue, I would say that we need a new narrative. We need a new narrative about child wasting. And some people might be surprised to hear from me that if we were to have one single pressing issue, this is the one. We, the nutrition community, I believe, Antonia, have managed to create a false narrative around child wasting, a narrative that seems to indicate that stunting is that form of malnutrition that can be prevented, and wasting is that form of malnutrition that needs to be treated. A false narrative that seems to indicate that stunting is that form of malnutrition that happens primarily in development settings, and wasting is that form of malnutrition that happens primarily in humanitarian settings and primarily in Africa. A false narrative that seems to indicate that national governments should be focusing on preventing stunting, while UNICEF and humanitarian partners need to treat children who are wasted and severely wasted. So we do need a new narrative, and I'm very happy to hear from you that that has been discussed at length. We need a narrative that makes it explicit that 2/3 of children who suffer from wasting, A, do not live in Africa, 2, do not live in a humanitarian setting, and 3, are not getting any treatment. And we need a new narrative that is very explicit about the fact that child wasting can and must be prevented. And when prevention fails, child wasting can and must be treated. I've taken the first 2 minutes of my 4 minutes to say one thing, is that we need a new narrative, and that good narratives save lives. Wrong narratives don't. However, you've asked me what are the urgent issues. So number one was a new narrative. Number two, programmatically, I think we need 4 things need to happen beginning this year, and we need to accelerate on this front. The first is, as I said before, this focus on prevention and increased services for the prevention of child wasting. Integrate these services in primary healthcare, as Francesco was reminding us. We need to prioritize these actions in primary healthcare to young, undernourished, pregnant women and children under 2 from vulnerable families. That is the prevention side. Then we need to improve early detection of child wasting, and I don't think we have paid enough attention to this in the past. We need to introduce innovations such as Family Mirac. We see an increasing number of countries and governments ready to take this innovation on. What are we waiting for? Let's move faster on this front. The earlier we detect children in need of treatment, the easier treatment will be, the shorter treatment will be, the less expensive treatment will be. 3, we need to simplify and optimize treatment for life-threatening forms of child wasting. We need one protocol, one product, one provider, and one single category of children in need of therapeutic treatment. Needless to say, we'll need to update our global protocols along those lines. And finally, we also need to accelerate the availability and affordability of RUTF. We need to explore how to produce RUTF closer to where the needs are, one, and we also need to explore new recipes and new formulas that might lower the cost of RUTF, which is a life-saving commodity. So those are the 5 fronts where UNICEF is putting as much weight as we can, the narrative and these 4 key accelerators. Thank you for the time, and happy to discuss further later on, Antonia.
Thank you so much, Victor. Your audio got a little bit quiet there, so not all of the audience might have caught all of your points. So make sure to move your mic closer for the next part, and I will make sure anyway that we come back on some of your points. I mean, I think for the point of view of the narratives for these global moments, this question about having a new narrative and being extremely clear on what that is really important, especially because we've heard from the conference how important it is that we mustn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think your narrative is very much based on all of this empirical knowledge that we've actually gathered in the last 20 years. So some very important points there. Thank you, Victor. Now we've got Francesco back. I'm going to ask you, Francesco, to pick up where you left off. You were giving us some impassioned inputs about the need for multi-sectoral approaches and a number of other points around mainstreaming and supply. So I would ask you just to come back and finish off your point, in particular looking at this question about how the WHO can play a role to bring all of the multiple stakeholders in nutrition policy together to make this more effective as a joint effort. So thanks for your patience and flexibility in getting back onto the platform, Francesco, and please do complete.
Thank you, Antonia, and I apologize. I don't know where exactly I left, but definitely the role of WHO is to complete the work on guidance. And we have an excellent collaboration with our sister agencies, particularly UNICEF, on answering a series of important questions that have been formulated, particularly around the early response to malnutrition for infants less than 6 months, the definition of the different levels of risk, the prevention and the treatment. So this is our task for 2021, and we hopefully are going to throw some light on the simplification of protocols, because we need to be able to really involve more community health workers. That's really the important element. And the other important element is to work on the supply of ready-to-use therapeutic food, looking at ways to produce locally. That's going to be an important element to shorten the supply chain. So it's a question of prices, but also it's a question of availability and local acceptability. So we will need to bring together the multiple actors in different constituencies, but also in different parts of the world to try and address that. So the improvement of the quality and the quantity of the supply. And of course, the financing aspect is going to be important. We are going to actively pursue, in the context of Nutrition for Growth, the request to make specific commitments around the management of wasting. That's going to be, again, an important collective effort. I don't think we should let the Food System Summit overshadow the importance of Nutrition for Growth, really as a way to strengthen the capacity of health services to respond to wasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Really good to hear you pick up on those final points. And I think, interesting, this thing about simplification. We've heard a lot during the conference that simplification is so much needed, and it needs to be simple for each context. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's an overall simplification, but making sure that it works in each context, I think, is very well understood. And delighted to hear your points about Nutrition for Growth. I think it's very important for all of us that the two events, the Food System Summit and Nutrition for Growth, are meaningfully linked, and that Nutrition for Growth is seen as the incredibly important conference it is, not a technical discussion, but a high-level political and financial discussion to look for those very real and concrete increased commitments on wasting. So thank you for that, Francesco. So I'm now going to turn to my next speaker. We took care in designing this panel to make sure that we didn't forget the realities on the ground. So who better to speak to us about this than our colleague Sophie Whitney, who's a nutrition expert with DG ECHO, the European Commission Humanitarian Office. And we wanted to make sure she had an opportunity to inject into this discussion of high-level policy and politics what she would like to see from her expert position as the biggest priorities that donors commit to address wasting and to fund nutrition programs in fragile contexts. So you've got them sitting here. Sophie, what would you like to ask the donors to commit to at the end of this year to make sure those needs are met? The floor is yours.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks a lot for having me. So yeah, I think for us, I think what's really key is to still be able to support our partners on the ground and be there where we are needed on the field, and of course take into account the reality of the field. So I think that's what we are trying to do also very much, is to unlock the potential of all these new approaches that we have talked about this week. I mean, the one that are going to be hopefully transformed into policies, but the one that are to come, because we know that, I mean, with 10 or 20% of the cases of wasting that are only treated today, we have a long road to go, and certainly we will learn a lot as we go, and we'll be able to infuse this knowledge in the way of that we have to work. So yeah, I think we have a unique role as a reminder and donor to create that space to really foster alternative approaches, innovation. So yeah, when we have partners on the ground who are in a situation where they cannot implement as such the CMAM approach, and they have to find a way to I don't know if you hear me well, to still deliver treatments. And I think for us, the alternative is not between the CMAM and the best, as we said, approach and an alternative. It's between an alternative and no treatment at all. And in that case, the choice is really made. Of course, we have to still ensure the quality of the treatment. We have to still ensure that everything that's being done and tested and proposed makes sense, is not harmful, is ethical. But I think, yeah, when we are in front of that choice, often we and also relying on the great capacity of our partners, we have to try new things. So that's the case, for instance, when we are short of our UTF, when we have to prioritize or maybe reduce the dosage. You know, what's a good practice is going to be. When we don't have access to population, when they are very remote, or when they are completely outside of the coverage of the health system, and we can only monitor or visit them once a month or once every 2 weeks. So what adaptation is going to work and is going to make a difference. So I think that all these challenges, they have drawn all these great adaptations that we have talked about this week. So there are also opportunities for us to learn and to really see how we can shape a little bit the guidance and make sure that, you know, when we are confronted to the same pattern, the same scenarios and constraint, we have a toolkit, we have a great way to be able to tackle it efficiently. So I think that's creating that toolbox and knowing that these practices, of course, they generate data, they generate evidence, and this evidence is also what is needed after to influence policy and to be able to put hopefully good practices at scale and available for everybody, for governments and for the partners on the ground. So I think it's one of the big role we have to play. Of course, it's not only through wasting. I think we talked a lot about prevention. So we have to do that also to increase the nutrition sensitivity of food assistance. We have to make sure also that, you know, when we intervene somewhere because there is a nutrition crisis, we don't forget about the preventative health aspect, and we deliver what is needed to ensure that children are not going to deteriorate into undernutrition. And now we have also a lot of new opportunities. In the past years, we see that social protection, social safety nets are something that is really getting an increasing importance in the countries where we work in, and so trying to make some articulation also with social protection. We have also certainly a great opportunity on cash assistance. So how can we also shape and make sure that whatever is being provided through cash for prevention is going also to have an impact on nutrition. Disaster risk reduction also is something that we should consider when we are in a world where we see increasingly climate change, shocks, climatic, etc. How can we make sure that we also plan for nutrition in our response, and we don't wait to be in front of a crisis to be ready to act. So that's I think that's the part on the technicalities, and I think just as a donor, we humanitarian donors are the one mainly, you know, funding for the most part nutrition action in fragile context. And as it was said a lot this week, of course, I mean it's a resource that has its limit. I mean we have crises that are expanding also. I mean we have certainly a lot of needs, and if we want to increase the coverage, if we want to do more and better, you will also have to tap into other streaming of funding. So yeah, and on that point, I think I really like the point that Victor made earlier about creating a new narrative, because I think it's exactly that. I mean, the wasting is really seen as a humanitarian issue. It's mainly borne by humanitarian actors. There is really this conception that it's not something that should be taken on board systematically as a health issue for children and as a health survival intervention. So definitely happy to also help about that, because we know that if we want to integrate health system, we have to make things simpler. We have to make things maybe cheaper. So that it can really be put at scale in a sustainable manner. So I think we can also have a role there to continue to feed a little bit the practice and create that link. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Sophie. So I guess, you know, the overall wrap up of that excellent response is that we have no shortage of ideas and tools. What we still need is decent connection and scale in terms of resources and response. And I think we haven't so far heard one of our favorite words, nexus, but I think the nexus in nutrition is as important as looking at the nexus between humanitarian development and peace building interventions. And we clearly need to go much further there. So thank you for all of those both very positive and inspiring and important reminders, Sophie. So I'm now going to turn to our fourth panelist. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our panel, Gerda Verburg, who is the coordinator of the SUN movement, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. So Gerda, our question for you this afternoon is in relation to nutrition in fragile contexts where we need to see so much change and so much more of a rapid and effective response. Do you think that there's an appropriate sense of urgency and alarm on how the pandemic, in particular this one, maybe future ones, will affect efforts to prevent and treat malnutrition? What do you think needs to happen from an advocacy perspective that's not already happening? Gerda, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antonia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think this is a great conference, and it brings to the table the sense of urgency, at least between the participants, because the simple answer is there enough sense of urgency? The answer is no. Because as we speak, every minute 7 children die due to hunger or malnutrition related causes. And this is what we should have in mind, and the worst is yet to come. The recent launched Lancet report tells us that the economic, food and health system disruption resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic are expected to continue to exacerbate all forms of malnutrition. And we have already the first estimations that they indicate that by 2022, the nutrition crisis will result in an additional 9.3 million more wasted children and 2.6 more stunted children. And the two issues are different but very closely related. There is an annex to them, as you already said. At the same time, it's expected to result in 168,000 more child deaths and 140 million more people that have to live in extreme poverty. So these are the numbers, and we should keep in mind that behind these numbers are people, are children. And with this in mind, certainly the sense of urgency is not big enough given the big problems. So what should happen, and how should it happen? I think the first thing to do is to translate global and regional commitments into concrete action. What does action look like? And are investors and commitment makers, are they putting their money and their efforts where their mouth is? That is the first thing. The second thing I would like to advocate for is that we demonstrate the power of we. Working together is more needed than ever. Let us all leave our own approach. Many of you are doing this already, because many of you are a member of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. That is a movement of people, country-led, where different organizations and institutions are working together. But my statement is it can be done better if partners like government sectors work better together. Donors align better at country level. UN agencies are stepping up in a very strong way, but they can do even better. Civil society, try to work as one at the country level. Humanitarian and development partners, they are already mentioned, to focus on the power of we to save lives from malnutrition and to prevent malnutrition, because this is also what we should focus on. But let us start with saving lives given the dire situation. And that is what we want to work on with all of you. It is the networking, the coming together and planning together, and work shoulder to shoulder at community level, at regional level, to fight wasting and all other forms of malnutrition, including of course the nexus between all different root causes. And let us make it a systems approach. I couldn't agree more. Preventing and fighting malnutrition needs to be wasting, stunting, but also hidden forms of malnutrition need to be part and parcel of the universal health coverage. But let's also take the opportunity to be strong advocates for a strong focus on preventing malnutrition in the Food System Summit. It is the Food System Summit as a run-up to the Nutrition for Growth. It has been said already. So, and to donors, because I know that there are also donors participating here, and we have one from the European Commission. I think please focus on the countries and the collaboration at country, and focus on creating impact, and create incentives for those partners who are working together, because sometimes subsidies and financing are preventing the right collaboration at the ground, because there are not enough incentives. And this is what we learn from time to time. And then at all levels, the multi-stakeholder platforms, please work together. We need academia to come with the right data and one agreed set of data. We need to include the private sector and encourage them to perform better, or push them to perform better. If we need to have legislation there and sanctions, then we need to use the sanctions to make clear that they have to be part and parcel of the of improvements. So we can only find sustainable and durable solutions if we really work together, put our words into actions, and are ready to collaborate more than is happening as we speak, both on fighting and on prevention. Finally, the Sun Movement is working very closely with the Global Nutrition Cluster, and we appreciate all the work they are doing. But I would like to invite all humanitarian partners to continue to work with some focal points and multi-stakeholder platforms to ensure a truly holistic approach at the country level, including improving and strengthening ownership at the country level. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Gerda. I think some really kind of strong calls there for a more muscular approach to collaboration and coordination, and being maybe a bit more realistic that sometimes incentives are needed to do that, and we definitely need to make sure that what's in place doesn't block that. That's extremely helpful. I think also hearing that we've really got to focus at country level. Yes, we have to scale, but things will work differently in different contexts, and we have the know-how to do that. We just need to put the resources and the will in place to back that up. So I think that's extremely helpful. And again, this call to make sure that the Food Systems Summit puts the nutrition issue on the agenda so that we can bring it to an effective end point at the Nutrition for Growth Summit. So I'm going to move to our penultimate panelist now. It's a real pleasure to have you with us, Vijay Rangarajan, the Director General of American and Overseas Territories at the FCDO. I know you can't be with us for very long, so it's really great that you could come and share with us a little bit reflections from the FCDO perspective on the question that we've asked you. So I'm going to, without further delay, put to you that question. So the UK has historically promoted longer term investments to address child wasting rather than focusing only on humanitarian funding, something I think Sophie would be happy to hear you say after what she just said. So what we'd love to hear from you are the lessons that the UK's learnt that could help achieve sustained improvement and reduce the negative impact of malnutrition on child and health development. Vijay, thank you very much for joining us, and please take the floor.
Great, thank you, Antonia. I hope you can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. It's nice to see you, Antonia, and Ruairí again. So I'm DG in FCDO. Just a quick explanation for why I'm on this august panel is I also deal with global health and climate and COVID and gender, as well as the Americas. The title's different. And one of the themes we're going to bring out is the interlinkages between the climate, the gender, health, and of course this issue of nutrition. And I'm going to build a lot on what some of you have said, in particular Gerda, who has stolen some of my best lines already. So first of all, this is extremely timely. We are seeing, and I won't repeat what Gerda said, but the impacts of COVID on nutrition, on acute malnutrition, are absolutely terrible. And we are seeing the data really clearly, the Lancet, but many other data sources. Famine remains really quite a severe threat. I think it's probably an immediate threat. So we have someone many of you will know, Nick Dyer, who's just been appointed Special Envoy for Famine Prevention for the UK by the Foreign Secretary, aiming to tackle and galvanise work exactly in that area. But this is being exacerbated by climate change, which is the long-term challenge of how do we reduce acute malnutrition in the long term. So that, and FCDO is obviously the merger of the FCO and DFID, and DFID has a huge and long and honourable track record in working in this area. And it goes back at least 20 years, where I think we tested the feasibility of what became community-based management of acute malnutrition. And you're absolutely right in your question, because over the last decade or so, we have shifted our focus a bit away from humanitarian response, so that continues, as I've said, and towards an approach of strengthening systems, very much the way that Gerda set out, actually. And for us, I think the Somalia famine in 2011 was one of the critical moments which created that policy shift. And let me try and, you asked for lessons, let me try and capture this one. If we tackle acute malnutrition as a humanitarian problem, we simply won't fix it and it'll keep on recurring. So we have to have stronger health systems, food systems, and decisive leadership, and all of those simultaneously. So in a little bit more detail, what have we learned? First of all, you need to frame the treatment for acute malnutrition as a health service and include it in all countries within health planning and financing. And to give you examples of really good work, Kenya, the UK has been working in Kenya a lot with Global Financing Facility and others to put nutrition services into health plans. But we think we're still seeing, it's a challenge for many countries, too much vertical funding and not enough emphasis on the health side. Gives rise to unpredictable funding, doesn't join up with other health services, undermines all the other objectives we have: maternal health, child health, sexual and reproductive health. We've got to make these things much more interlinked and mutually supportive. So we are going to continue to push for malnutrition treatment and nutrition services to be prioritized within universal health coverage. First point. Second point is prevention has to be front and center. We just can't come back to covering treatment costs after crisis after crisis. But also, obviously, the outcomes are better. If we prevent acute malnutrition from happening, we improve dramatically people's health and development in the longer term. Now, it's pretty clear that we have missed some big opportunities for this in the previous years. So the last 5 years, we've funded some analysis of the drivers of acute malnutrition and reviews of what works. And there are simply some quite big gaps in many countries because acute malnutrition was not thought about or monitored. So we think that the current push on to transform food systems is a really good opportunity. And it all focuses on the lack of access to safe, nutritious and sustainable diets, particularly for women and children, but much more broadly as well. So we're going to give particular focus to Action Track 5 of the UN Food Systems Summit. We want to build more resilient food systems for many reasons: the health ones, the malnutrition ones, the climate ones, the social development ones as well. It is an absolutely core framing concept, I think, as to how we're going to approach this from now on. There's clearly a big read across to how we address acute malnutrition. And we wonder about using acute malnutrition and its reduction as a way to measure the resilience of food systems transformations. Put it in explicitly, and my current foreign secretary is very keen on, you do what you measure, and this will be quite a powerful driver. The third, I just want to agree with Gerda on the importance of data. We have to know, if we're measuring, we have to know what the data is, and how those at risk can access these services and diets they need, and whether we're moving towards the SDG target. I think we can all probably accept that COVID has shown that our existing nutrition data systems are not good enough, and particularly because global financing is under real pressure, we have to have the data to support that and to justify it. So we, as you know, are G7 presidency this year. In the initiative on famine prevention, we're including a focus exactly on how to address those data gaps. Building on some of the work we've done recently, there's an S3M initiative in Sudan, development of models to improve prediction of acute malnutrition. And we're now looking at some solutions on improving nutrition information, very much with UNICEF. But there's lots of scope for innovation here, we think. Final lesson is we need to address acute malnutrition as collaboratively and transparently as possible. So in 2020, you may recall, we launched a 5-year partnership with UNICEF to tackle some of the biggest barriers to this. We're testing these new models on to improve predictability of financing, reduce the costs associated with treatment, and trying to improve the domestic financing for services. We're trying, as I said, to integrate the treatment for acute malnutrition within health, improve prevention, and link all this into climate change. Not easy, but necessary for the long term. And we're aiming to create a space for the dialogue on all of this, because every one of us and many others have a crucial role to play. So I'm pleased to be able to announce that the UK is going to be co-chairing with UNICEF a new action review panel on acute malnutrition. It's looking at how we can use our collective influence, our expertise, the huge knowledge and energy of the people in this conference and wider to really drive forward the efforts to end acute malnutrition by 2030. We'll share some details of this in the coming months and hope many of you will be involved. But thank you very much for being on this panel. Back to you, Antonia.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Well, it was great to have you with us, and again to hear those extremely concrete lessons learned. You know, it always makes for a satisfying panel when the inputs are very coherent. I have a feeling that I'm not going to get you guys to argue with each other very much, which is, you know, sometimes a shame, but I think in this case it's something extremely positive. I think what I want to underline, obviously coming back from that, which is that it's extremely important and exciting to hear of the UK kind of maintaining that nutrition leadership role in this action review with UNICEF. And I think given all that we've heard about trying to get beyond this box-like thinking of associating certain forms of malnutrition with only humanitarian settings, etc., will be really, really driven forward by this. And I'm sure it's something that will play into more successful and concrete outcomes at the 2 summits later this year. So much appreciate hearing that from you and the fact that you were able to make time to join us. I'm going to move now to our final panelist, who doesn't need perhaps too much introduction to the audience so far, but I'm really, really pleased and honoured to be able to add to this illustrious list of panellists Ruairí de Búrca, who's the Director General of Development Cooperation and the Africa Division in Irish Aid. And so you've got the kind of wrap-up question, Ruairí, which I hope you're ready for, because we're expecting you to answer all the things that remain hanging in the air. But this is the question we wanted to put to you, which is this: if we are to truly make real strides to prevent wasting, and we've heard impassioned pleas about the prevention agenda today, to truly commit to and act to reach the furthest behind first, again, a challenge which that shameful 80% figure brings into stark view, what needs to happen at a political level to make these big moments like N4G and the Food Systems Summit in particular really count? How can we make them make the difference that we need? So Ruairí, please do enlighten us. Thank you.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Look, first of all, thanks to everybody. I mean, I think it's been a fascinating few days. And in many ways, the last few days have maybe answered the question. We know what we need to do. You know, we know what we need to do at a technical level. We know the challenges. I mean, Vijay picked out prevention. I mean, prevention is always better than cure, and we do need to focus on prevention. Where we don't succeed in prevention, I mean, like the subject of this conference, CMAM, plus, you know, the opportunity in the two big conferences this year, the N4G and the Food Systems Summit, are opportunities for us to come back and re-engage or engage in new ways. To do that, I mean, and I wanted to pick up Victor's point about narrative. It's really important we have compelling narratives for our politicians. And I suppose politicians in two directions. I mean, I think there's a need for a compelling narrative for politicians in what we could call donor countries at a time when there's a financial squeeze. And I think a compelling narrative to politicians in countries whose budgets are under strain, partly because of COVID, so that they make choices as well around the, I don't want to use the word nexus because I think it should be banned from the English language, but that connection or that continuum between food, nutrition and health. And allied to that, I think the connection with good politics, because oftentimes the challenges to good food, to good nutrition and good health are a consequence, not just of climate, although partly of climate, not just because of circumstances of birth, but also because of bad politics. So how do we inject good politics into our decision making in both directions? At a time when there are a lot of really hard decisions for politicians to make because resources are constrained. And also political bandwidth is narrow because of the pandemic. And we all see in all of our countries the stresses and strains that's putting onto political systems. And that's where I think that I really liked, you know, that compelling narrative. And it has to be a narrative of hope as well, because we have to invest in hope. It has to be about change, and it has to be simple but also sophisticated, and that's easier said than done. And in that, I think the challenge to all of us here is to be joined up, because the danger is that we think in our silos. And I have a suspicion that working in two dimensions, like we are at the moment, where we don't actually get to meet in person, reinforces a little bit of that siloed mentality. I hope that as we move to the conferences, that we'll move away from, you know, meeting virtually, although that has its strengths, to actually be back in person and to find ways to overcome some of the barriers to effective collective action that are inherent in any systems approach. You know, we shouldn't reproach ourselves, but we should be mindful of the need to think beyond our mandates and our traditional ways of working, because we have to work really smart. We know what we need to do to meet the challenge, and Gerda gave us the numbers. You know, they're staggering. The number of people hungry this year, by UN figures, potentially 80% more than last year. So the whole system is going to be under strain. So we have to be really, really smart. So it's how can we do that best? And I think, you know, we have a moment when we can cut through because of the two summits to bring political decision makers back around to the agenda we've been discussing over the last few days. I think also we need to root it in communities. So we have a high level political discussion, but it has to be rooted in communities, because ultimately it's at the community level that change will be transformational. I think we also have to think about really getting mothers and children at the heart of our narratives, because that's how they're the people who, if we target, we will make most difference. And that interdependence between mothers and babies is really important. And health systems are a really good way to get at mothers and children too. And I think that also brings it back to where politicians are, which is in a COVID mindset. And that's where the health part of the nutrition debate might actually be quite resonant this year. We know what we need to do. I don't think there's a magic wand, and it's going to be challenging. I mean, part of what we will be doing on the way to the Food System Summit is we've appointed, in the spirit of special envoys, a special envoy to that, Tom Arnold, who is very familiar with CMAM from his time as CEO of Concern. And I think part of what Tom's job will be to kind of talk to people, try and find, maybe we can challenge them to find game-changing solutions, but taking the discussion forward on the path to New York in the autumn as part of that. We did set ourselves a target to double our spend on nutrition by 2020, and we met that ahead of schedule. And I think one of the things I think we need to really think about is a new set of targets, ambitious targets, not to 2030, because that's too far, but from here to say 2025, and then from 25 to 30. And as we take forward the discussions and the lessons of the last few days, and as we look forward to N4G and the Food Systems Summit, I do think we need to really reflect on what are the right targets, what are achievable, what are with a degree of stretch, and how do we do that in a way that delivers hope. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Antonia.
Well, Rory, thank you very much. I feel that having meanly posed the question in a very challenging way, you actually gave us a really strong and important response. I mean, I think it is important, this question about narrative, and it is true also that people need to be given answers, not just problems. So I think you know, one of the resonating messages, in fact, from the CMAM conference is we do have solutions. We do know how things work. We do think we can do it better. We do think we need better data. We do think we can do a lot of things in a more cost-effective way. We do need to do more research, but the answers are out there. And I'm struck myself actually listening to you all about how, you know, when I started in the humanitarian and development field, you know, more than a quarter of a century ago, nutrition was this like super niche technical subject. And I can see that the efforts of all of the organizations and people who've been part of this conference have really kind of dragged it out where it should be in the political spotlight in a way where we can construct a narrative which explains that nutrition is actually the fundamental building block of human flourishing and development. So that's something incredibly powerful and important. So I'm glad that you gave us that note of positivity to use those opportunities in a really positive way. Now we only have a very few minutes left, so of course we were hoping to have a more active conversation with all of you. So I'm just going to see whether any of you would like to pick up on a couple of the questions that we're getting from the audience, and I'm going to come back on one in particular around the right to food, because I think you know, we in all of the technical talk we sometimes lose, you know, the touchstone of the fundamental human rights that lie behind this discussion, and I'm just wondering, while we talk about concrete targets, increased funding and political commitment, and making sure that people are very clear what concrete deliverables and targets should be, is there a role that we can envisage for the narrative around the right to food and the delivery of nutrition-specific interventions at the Food Systems Summit, so that we can make it something that puts nutrition again in that very front seat? So I'm just wondering if any of you would be particularly interested in picking up on that. I'm wondering whether perhaps Victor, you might like to come back on that. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and I need to first check that you can hear me.
You're a little bit soft, so I think you're going to have to shout your intervention if you're as close to the mic as you can get.
Okay, if I change to that, can you hear me better?
A little bit, but it's still quite faint.
Sorry about that, and I don't know why that is. So let me see if I need to shout. Can you hear me now, Antonia? Good. So we're a rights-based organization, UNICEF, and therefore our nutrition strategy, which we just released last year, is a rights-based strategy. That is, nutrition is a fundamental right. And I think it is extremely important for this community that is trying to deliver good nutrition for the youngest of the young, the poorest of the poor, and children who are being left behind by mainstream development and humanitarian crisis, to keep reminding the global community and governments that there is a fundamental right. So I think we should not lose sight of the rights perspective. One, I really like very much what Ruairí said about a narrative of hope and a narrative of feasibility. So it's not just any type of hope, but it is a hope that is evidence-based, that is a hope that is based on our conviction that what we are advocating for is feasible and needs to be delivered at scale. So bringing together the rights perspective and the hope plus feasibility perspective, I think is going to be of the essence in that new narrative that we need both for donor countries and for program countries. Over.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your struggles with the mic. I think this may be the moment we have to say goodbye to Vijay. Vijay, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for your inputs. And I think, you know, what we heard was that it's the multi-stakeholder approach is the thing we have to achieve from whichever perspective we come. So I think the continuing leadership of the UK on nutrition is something that is valued by everyone. So we really look forward to hearing more about the activities of your new envoy and about the action review. So Vijay, wishing you an excellent rest of afternoon, and we will see you soon. I think for thanks. Bye bye. We just have time, I think, for one more question, and I want to come back to this idea about. Hi everybody. Did we have a little? I think we had a little technical glitch there, which I am very sad. Hi everybody. So unfortunately, I think given the technical glitch there, we've only got a couple of minutes left for this last question, and I think you might have missed some of it. But I was wondering if either Rory or Gerda would have just a couple of words to say on how can we present a narrative to politicians and decision makers about at the practical level it's continuum of care, and at the policy level it's the horrible word nexus. How can we make that sound compelling when we're speaking to this issue at summits such as we're having at the end of this year? Any final thoughts? Perhaps Gerda first from you and then from Rory before we close.
I can do it in almost one sentence. It is about create incentives on collaboration that focuses on impact that is there to stay.
Thank you. What admirable brevity. Incentives for collaboration, extremely important and empowering remark. Rory, is there anything else you'd like to say on this question of how we can sell the idea of supporting and incentivizing collaboration, either working in the nexus or continuum of care for politicians to pick up on?
Again, in the spirit of brevity, I don't think we can afford not to. Because it's effective, it's efficient, it's smart, and ultimately it saves resources to work together on this agenda in as joined up a way as possible.
Well, thank you very much. I can tell you, if I was a political decision maker, then that would definitely have persuaded me. So I want to thank these brilliant panelists for the time they've spent this afternoon trying to turn the technical richness of the conference into political messaging that the advocates amongst us can use for the summits. I think it's been incredibly valuable. So I just want to thank you all extremely much for your time and your inputs. And I'm now going to hand the floor back to my colleagues Ella McSweeney and Dominic McSorley to close the conference. If the panelists wish to remain with us for the final 10 minutes, they're welcome. And of course, if you need to be off somewhere else, we entirely understand. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Antonia. Very well done.
Okay, Antonia, thank you very much. What a fantastic panel. And really, it's just my job to end with a few closing remarks. But I suppose first and foremost, I really want to thank everyone who just engaged in that panel, but actually everybody who engaged over the last 4 days, for tuning in, for speaking, presenting, everyone who engaged on chat. And also a big thanks to everybody who made it all possible, from our conference partner, Irish Aid, to the professional guiding hands of Ella McSweeney, to our incredible steering committee, which had UNICEF, ECHO, Irish Aid, ENN and ACF, who pulled this all together. And really finally to the concern team who worked behind the scenes, calmly addressing whatever technical issues came up and doing it well. You know, key to the success of any conference is really the level of engagement. And I think really it's fantastic that we had between 700 and 800 people participating every day. So we really exceeded expectations. And central to this was the quality of the discussions, which were phenomenal. You know, there was informed, diverse perspectives from right across the sector. And importantly, many of these coming directly from countries that are themselves experiencing rapid increases in hunger and growing levels of food insecurity. But, you know, we know, of course, that success isn't just based on information shared or gained. It's also determined by what we as individuals and organizations choose to do next to advance the solutions and the ways forward that have come up and were summarized there by Kate Golden. Each of these is critical in their own, But we know that if we're truly going to accelerate progress towards zero hunger, then there has to be a commitment to also push for change in the wider spheres of political influence. Because as we've heard, the challenges faced today are much greater than those that we faced 20 years ago when CMAM was first brought into being. And just, the new IPC early warning, famine warning, showing that 34 million people today are struggling with emergency levels of acute hunger and are one step away from starvation. And in particular noted that families in Yemen and South Sudan are already in the grip of starvation. So if that's a reminder, if we needed it, change is absolutely needed, and it's needed urgently. And we have to get back on track. And here's a few things I think that we picked up. First, it's clear that nobody should be dying of hunger because of a shortage of funding. And, really, this is not the time for governments to be cutting back on aid budgets. And yet I think there's no clear evidence of the persistent bankruptcy of humanity, where humanitarian appeals remain consistently underfunded by an average of about 45%. Secondly, we need to get behind the Secretary-General's call for a massive global effort, a decade of action to 2030, that gets more governments, civil society and businesses to get involved in humanitarian response, but also longer-term commitments to ending poverty and hunger. And that means prioritizing prevention, not just response, and in particular in fragile and conflict-affected states. And if we're truly going to reach those in greatest needs, then there has to be a seismic shift of resources and new thinking to reach those most in need. I think thirdly, we really need to challenge the global ambivalence to diplomacy and peace building. Of the 13 largest food crises in the world, 10 are conflict related. And so it's imperative that the UN really comes back to the reason of its foundation in the first place, and that is to prevent war rather than just react and manage it, and to end the militarization of solutions, embrace complexity of negotiation and diplomacy. And I think the arrival of the Biden administration, as well as the timely appointment of Ireland and Norway onto the seats of the Security Council, are all positive developments towards pushing the agenda on this. And finally, we need a global food system, one that can feed every person every day, everywhere, and that will provide safe food and adequate nutrition, and that also protects the capabilities and contributions of smallholder farmers. This is a food system that has to be more resilient, and that shifts from being a contributor to climate change to being part of the solution that protects the world's natural resources. What we've heard today is that addressing all these issues needs to be central to the discussions at the upcoming Food Systems Summit. And importantly, they need to be dealt with urgency, the sense of an urgency and immediacy that has been expressed throughout the last 4 days. I'm reminded that another president, US President John F. Kennedy, gave the opening address at the first ever World Food Congress, which was held in Florida. And he closes his address by saying, we have the means, we have the capacity to wipe hunger and poverty from the face of the earth in our lifetime. We need only the will. That was June 4th, 1963, 58 years ago. And we really now need to start delivering on decades of promises that have been given and yet not realized. Every contribution that was made over the past 4 days was itself a challenge to the inevitability of hunger. And the key message from the conference I'm hearing is that the current levels of global hunger and human suffering cannot be accepted as the new normal, and that ending this will require all the richness of learning and knowledge on all the context-specific solutions that have been highlighted here by many. But most of all, it requires renewed political will and leadership. Once again, thank you all, and I wish us all every success in achieving our collective ambition. Take care.